pant at Halloween.
I like that clip because it highlights, some of the things that are the same in any interaction between a parent and child reading a book. So you see the mother and child clearly enjoy that as a shared activity. That's a favorite book for the child that they've read together a number of times. And the parent also uses that as an opportunity to teach the child some new vocabulary items. So in the course of reading that book, the child learns a little bit more about what a pumpkin patch is. At the same time, clearly there's some differences. So you notice the use of sign language. And I would hope it also gives you a little bit of an understanding of how rich and creative a language sign language can be, and how it can be used as a way of promoting interaction within a wide variety of activities, including book reading. As we talk about working with students with visual impairments, as we talk about working with students who have hearing impairments, there are roughly 20 million people in the United States who have a hearing problem. There are about 1 million adults who are considered deaf, and over 50,000 children who are considered deaf. The sort of common definition of deafness is that an individual cannot understand words that are shouted in their better ear. So clearly we have more sophisticated ways of assessing hearing ability, but again, an individual who is deaf may have some hearing or be aware of some sounds, but their hearing is so minimal that they cannot understand words that are shouted in their better ear. When we look at outcomes as adults for individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing, about 50% get a high school diploma. By and large, adults who are employed and who are deaf or hard of hearing earn about 20% less than hearing individuals. Typically, employers are very enthusiastic about individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing, so they have a reputation of being outstanding workers. However, they experience difficulties in job advancement. In a few moments, we'll be talking about some of the challenges that individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing experience in reading and writing activities. So I think this in part is maybe some of the reason that they experience difficulty in job advancement. We have a slide here of the ear and the auditory canal and sort of a brief explanation of how hearing works. Again, I would never imagine of putting this on a test. Again, I just wanted to give you sort of a brief sense of the complexity of what's going on. Basically, when we're talking about hearing, the sound waves come in and they hit the eardrum or tympanic membrane. Behind that eardrum are some delicate bones that convert these sound waves into almost a different type of sound wave. Eventually, these sound waves become converted to nerve impulses, and the messages are sent to the brain. There are 3 types of hearing loss that you may hear described for individuals. The first is a conductive hearing loss. So that means that there's something that's not working correctly in the middle or outer ear. So at the stages where the sound is still a sound wave, something isn't going on, something isn't working correctly. A sensory neural hearing loss means that there's something wrong in the auditory nerve. So a little bit further on in the process, something is happening that's preventing a good signal from going through. Some individuals have a mixed hearing loss, so both a conductive and a sensory neural hearing loss. We'll talk about this a little bit later on in the series when we talk about different types of hearing aids and hearing amplification systems, but clearly depending upon the type of hearing loss an individual has sustained, it may or may not do any good to simply make environmental noises louder or noisier for that individual. As in the case of vision, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the milder impacts of hearing loss that we may see. Any of you that have raised children know that middle ear infections are very common occurrences. 2/3 of preschoolers have had at least one middle ear infection. 16% of preschoolers have had 6 or more middle ear infections. And we're just starting to learn a little bit more about what recurrent middle ear infections can mean for students in terms of acquiring language. When you think about it, we're talking about kids at an age where typically there's a very rapid acquisition of language. If those students are experiencing real difficulty in hearing words being used around them or hearing those words used clearly, that can have an impact on language learning. We not only have concerns about hearing loss among preschoolers because of middle ear infections, increasingly we have concern about hearing loss among high school students because of, I guess we'll call them iPods and noise-induced hearing loss. There's been estimates that 21% of the high school population have hearing loss attributable to their wearing of music players at sound levels that are inappropriate and that are causing lasting damage. For those of you that want to have a concern in this area, I would encourage you to look at your manufacturer's website to find out the sound levels at which these devices should be played, because many of them are capable of being played at volume levels that can cause lasting hearing damage. And as I said, we're seeing that right now in about 1 in 5 students in the high school population. So we've talked about middle ear infections and we've talked about iPods, but to tell the truth, among students with more serious hearing loss, so students who are deaf and hard of hearing, the cause is often unknown. Sometimes it seems to be related to premature birth. Sometimes there seems to be a hereditary component to hearing loss and deafness. We also know that hearing loss is frequently seen among children who have a diagnosis of Down syndrome. So 50% of children who have a diagnosis of Down syndrome also have a hearing loss. Interestingly, we know that 74% of children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, 74% of those children had 10 or more middle ear infections as children. So we really don't have a full understanding of the relationship between those two issues yet, but I just find it interesting that children with ADHD also experienced periods of substantial hearing loss as young children. Often as a school teacher, you may be informed that a child you are working with is experiencing difficulty in hearing, and this will be picked up on a hearing screening, or you may refer a child on yourself because you have concerns to a hearing screening. I did want to mention that partly because of the challenging conditions under which hearing screenings are often conducted. So often the people who are conducting these screenings are not able to carry them out under optimal conditions. It's been estimated that less than 50% of children who have a hearing loss will actually have that hearing loss detected during a typical hearing screening. So the hearing screenings that are being conducted in schools are helpful in identifying, large numbers of children who have a hearing loss, but you can't assume that because a hearing problem was not detected in a routine hearing screening that a student does not have a hearing loss. So if you do have concerns about a student and those concerns were not picked up in a typical hearing screening, I would strongly encourage you to follow up with the health professionals at your school, whether it's a nurse or a speech-language pathologist, and ask that a more rigorous investigation be conducted. Again, less than 50% of the children who have a significant hearing loss have that hearing loss detected in a typical hearing screening. So it may be necessary for you as a teacher to advocate for additional assessment activities. Typically, the kind of information that you will get out of a more rigorous investigation activity will be audiogram on the child. This is not what the audiogram will look like. I did just want to share with you some of the information that you'll typically get in an audiogram. What an audiogram typically will tell you is information on the hearing level that the individual can detect. So On the left-hand column there, you can see that there are various gradations to indicate a hearing level in decibels. A baby's cry or whimper or a vacuum cleaner typically comes in somewhere between 40 and 60 decibels. A grand piano comes in at about 80 decibels, and a good rock band comes in at about 110, 120 decibel levels. Just for your information, listening to noise at 100 to 120 decibels for more than 20 minutes can cause hearing damage. So for those of you headed out to concerts, you may want to take something to protect yourself. So again, in the left-hand column there, we see the hearing level in decibels. Across the top, we see the different frequencies, so low frequency and high frequency sounds. And you can also see there that different sounds in speech occur at different frequency levels. So an individual with a high frequency loss may be able to hear sounds like d, b, n, but they would not hear sounds like f, g, f. Okay? So an audiogram will provide you with information both on the hearing level in decibels and any losses an individual may be experiencing in terms of different frequencies. Most speech takes place at between 40 and 60 decibels. However, when we start to look at what a decibel hearing loss may mean for an individual, it quickly becomes apparent that we need to do everything we can to remediate as quickly as possible even a mild hearing loss. An individual that has a hearing loss of 11 to 24 decibels is going to have difficulty hearing faint speech in a noisy background. And to some extent, at first that may not seem like a big deal, but you think about how often as a teacher you may be involved in speaking in a quiet voice to a student to deliver instructions while other children are working in the background. So that's a classic example of faint speech in a noisy background. That's something that's going to be very difficult for an individual with a minimal hearing loss to hear. By grade 4, an individual who has a minimal hearing loss that has not been remediated will typically experience a 1-year language delay. So all those words that individual missed, all those little conversations, typically contributes to about a 1-year language delay. An individual who has a hearing loss between 25 and 39 decibels is described as having a mild hearing loss. This individual will have difficulty hearing faint speech even in a quiet background. To some extent, you can mimic the effect of a mild hearing loss by closing your ear with your fingers. So don't stick your fingers in your ears, but if you close your ears in a sense with your fingers and listen to this DVD or watch TV, that'll give you a sense of what a mild hearing loss is like. Typically, if that loss is not addressed, by grade 4, that individual will be experiencing a 2-year language delay. So they may, chronologically be appropriate for grade 4, but they will have the expressive and receptive vocabulary of an individual in grade 2. With that kind of hearing loss and that kind of language delay, that individual is 10 times more likely to have to repeat a grade than an individual who did not have that type of hearing loss. Finally, individuals with more moderate and severe hearing delays, hearing loss, individuals that have a 40 to 54 decibel hearing loss will have difficulty with hearing conversational speech. If this hearing loss is not addressed, that individual by grade 4 will be experiencing a 3-year language delay and clearly is at strong academic risk for being successful in the school system. Some of the classroom behaviors that may help you to see that a student is experiencing a hearing loss. So again, if you're looking for some of the warning signs that may lead you to recommend a referral to a school nurse for a screening or to your school district's speech-language pathologist for follow-up hearing assessments, this type